This is Jerusalem, a name in every day's headline news. Pathé takes you into this city to show you where and how the British soldier is carrying out the dirtiest, most dangerous, and most thankless job in the world today. For him, Jerusalem has no glamour, no mystery, and no rewards. Only hard work and constant, nerve-breaking suspense. Barbed wire, a people sullen and hostile. While Arab and Jew have a cause to battle for, the British soldier is there only because it is his job to keep the peace. That is the British Tommy's life in Palestine today. We salute him.
Our armed forces were very strong in the Middle East. There was the base in Egypt and also a lot of troops in Palestine. Mainly used, of course, in dealing with Jewish and Arab malcontents, but still also a military base. And so there was no question of our just disappearing, as it were, rapidly. He was thinking in terms of a settlement, I think, which would have been acceptable to both Jews and Arabs, and which would have given us certain rights.
Meanwhile, the Zionists pressed ahead, building new kibbutzim in strategic areas, the military foundation of a Jewish state. Their partition scheme would give them less land than they wanted, but still a stronghold in which Jews could settle freely. Faced with the overwhelming energy of the Zionists, a Palestinian leader appealed to the British.
All we ask is to have the natural right of all nations, independence. We seek the setting up of a democratic government in which all genuine citizens will have the same rights and the same obligations.
Although the Arab League backed the Palestinian demand, Britain rejected it. But the Arabs still relied on Britain to withstand Zionist pressure.
Compared with the Zionists, they were separated by the totally different culture and procedures and politics of their countries and ours. I mean, if they did make some kind of submission in writing, it would be wrongly worded, the arguments would be wrong, it would be sent to the wrong person. Whereas, of course, the Zionist lobby was right in among British politics, and there were Zionists so close to the cabinet that there have been instances where cabinet ministers actually telephoned the result of a cabinet meeting straight to the Zionist concern.
Well, the fact is that the Arab states had never accurately estimated nor realized the power of Zionism. And they thought the Zionists were just a few Jews who were in Palestine and a few Jews who we know in Iraq and around. They didn't realize the power of Zionism in the United States, nor the influence of Zionism on the United States government.
At the end of 1946, Bevin went to America, knowing that many British cabinet ministers supported the Zionist plan for partition of Palestine. But in his talks with the Americans, he remained adamant that Britain would not risk antagonizing the Arabs. Bevin devised a new way out of the dilemma. Winning the cabinet over, he asked the United Nations to advise Britain on a solution.
We were ambivalent. On the one hand, we wanted to get out of Mr. Bevin's clutches. On the other hand, when he said, "I'll put it to the United Nations," he said this in a rather threatening voice. "You think I'm bad, all right, I'm going to suggest somebody who will hit you even harder, and you'll get nothing out of the UN at all."
Oh, we thought with the United Nations, we were quite optimistic. We thought the United Nations would really act by the spirit of the Charter. And the spirit of the Charter certainly would have protected the rights of the Palestinians, the inhabitants of the country. But of course, what happened was the cart was turned over by Truman.
From Palestine, first pictures of the latest bomb outrage. Jewish terrorists blow up the Goldsmith Officers Club in Jerusalem. 13 Britons were killed and 16 injured. Says Palestine Commander-in-Chief, General Macmillan, the men responsible for these killings are not terrorists. They're just plain thugs and murderers.
Is he still alive, General Macmillan?
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, you could call us anything. Of course, he accused us of being, but I could say the same about him.
Of course, I have tremendous sympathy, as all the British people did have for the Jews for their persecution by Hitler. But that didn't detract from the fact that to get them settled in Palestine so that they did have a proper home had to be done in an orderly and constitutional manner, and not by murders.
The army decided to try on the Jews some of the methods familiar to the Palestinians from their rebellion. They stepped up death sentences on terrorists and imposed martial law on Jewish communities in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It was a collective punishment: no work, no shops, no services, and strict curfews.
The martial law period was a much more active one from our point of view than any other period had been. We carried out 63 operations in the 16 days of martial law, because we had prepared, as I said, we planned it in a sense. We provoked it. And I remember the general in charge of the operation had a press conference every morning in the hotel, and he said, we've got them bottled up. You can see they're surrounded on three sides. On land and sea, you can see our boats patrolling the coast. And this went on for 16 days, and then martial law just collapsed.
Our hands were very considerably tied. Had the army been allowed, in fact, to act as an army, I feel we could have contained particular situations that just got out of hand to us being, frankly, too gentlemanly. We had to be seen to be acting in the right way.
4,000 miles away at the United Nations, the Zionists were winning support, contrary to British forecasts. In June 1947, a special committee, known as UNSCOP, was sent on a fact-finding tour. To the Arabs, this was yet another inquiry dominated by America, which had no right to pronounce on their future. Palestinian leaders boycotted its hearings. In contrast, the Jewish agency set out to impress.
We appointed two liaison officers, Horowitz, who was later our leading economist and banker, and myself, to accompany the commission and, as it were, illuminate the whole Zionist picture from their point of view. And therefore it was part of my job to see that they learnt as much about our point of view as possible.
The Zionist lesson was driven home by the legendary Exodus affair. It proved a powerful publicity coup.
With a cargo of 4,500 refugees, the Exodus is the largest ship ever to attempt to run the watchful British naval blockade. After a bloody battle with a British boarding party, the refugees disembark at Haifa. Some are dying. 20 others are in a serious condition. And as the tired and weary refugees are transferred to British prison ships, two members of the United Nations Committee on Palestine silently look on.
They actually went on board, some members of the UN Commission, and they saw the hose pipes and the tear gas being turned on these very wretched-looking people who had escaped from concentration camps in Germany. It was apparently such a squalid spectacle that the first thing that the UNSCOP decided was not partition or against partition, but the mandate has to end.
With the tide running against him, Bevin decided to make an example of the Exodus refugees. He sent them back where they had come from, to Germany and the refugee camps. For Bevin, it was a propaganda disaster. But Britain was in a tough mood. In Palestine, they hanged 3 more Irgun terrorists. Menachem Begin hit back. The Irgun kidnapped and hanged 2 British sergeants. They left their bodies booby-trapped for when the British found them.
All decent people must have been horrified by the murder by Jewish terrorists of the 2 British sergeants, Mervyn Pace and Clifford Martin. Until the appalling situation in Palestine is cleared up, unspeakable outrages may well continue.
With the burial of the sergeants went British hopes for a future in Palestine. Parliament and the public demanded the withdrawal of British troops.
I'm speaking on behalf of my mother, Mrs. Martin, who is broken-hearted and prostrate at the terrible news of the loss of her son. And let us hope that we can find a solution to this terrible problem in Palestine and bring an end to all this unnecessary murdering of young British innocent servicemen.
Obviously, it was becoming increasingly difficult for the armed forces to maintain law and order. Especially at that time, it was the Jews, I mean, who were obviously producing an extremely effective underground movement. And Bevin would have liked to deal with it, but it wasn't possible.
We were under very strong political pressure from the Foreign Office because they were looking at the wider national relations, for example, with the United States and also with the Arab world, and they were doing a careful balancing act, which often amounts to, well, anything you do will be difficult and dangerous, so let's do very little.